This episode is being brought to you in part by Veeva Systems. Veeva connects patients, sites, and sponsors on a single technology ecosystem to make clinical trials easier and faster. Obviously, you guys have heard me talk a lot about Veeva SiteVault and how it's made our regulatory process a lot smoother. And we have a whole lot less minders laying around, which is a huge plus in my book. Look, there's already 4,500 sites using SiteVault and more than 400 industry sponsors using Veeva clinical applications. In fact, 65% of all global clinical trials run on Veeva. That's a lot of site sponsors and trials. The best part, SiteVault's completely free to use, so make sure you head on over to sites.veeva.com today and check it out. This episode is also brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site network sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. Make sure you go check them out at realtime-ctms.com, complete one of their contact forms, and get a free demo. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Before we introduce this week's guest, I just want to take a moment and ask you guys to check out notetofilepodcast.com and check out our upcoming live streams. We've got some really great shows coming up, including Raymond Nomizu from CREO, Rick Greenfield from Real-Time CTMS, and a Veeva live demo, including a whole bunch of other guests. But I really love the opportunity to engage with the clinical trial community, so please make sure and check it out. It's on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook under Note to File Podcast. Our guest this week is Mitchell Hilbe. Mitchell's been involved in clinical research since high school, as he was introduced to the industry at a very young age. He carved out his own path as a paramedic and EMS instructor for several years before jumping back into clinical research around 8 years ago as a CRA. Mitch is currently working as a senior CRA, and he also recently co-founded Kenzona Clinical Research earlier this year. Kenzona is designed as a scalable SMO using Veeva SiteVault. Mitch also founded the Clinical Research Justice League group to advocate for better quality and ethics in the clinical trial community. Really fun and pretty dense discussion this week. We talk about the challenges of staffing at the site level, how site-focused tech solutions can help site owners better manage their business, the pros and cons of starting a site as a CRA, and research coordinator CRA relationship dynamics. So without further ado, Mitchell Hilbe. All right, today we have on Mitchell Hilbe. Hey man, how's it going?
Going well. How are you doing?
I'm not too shabby. This has been an interesting week, but I feel like they
wrapping
all
up
are
the year.
nowadays. Yeah, we're coming up. This is December 9th, so maybe closer to the end of the year, even right after before this comes out. But if you're listening, that's a vibe check. It's getting to be middle of December, so that's where we're at here. Well, very cool. I want to kind of open up the same way I do with all our guests. I think it's always really cool to kind of hear people's entrance into the clinical trial space. Look, people come in all kinds of crazy ways. So if you would, humor us, tell us a little bit about your clinical trial origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the term origin story as well. We'll get into that later too. But yeah, so how I got into research initially was, I was fortunate enough to have a family that was already involved. My mom had wore many hats in the industry, global project manager, all through, oncology, nurse that got into trials. So when I was just getting out of high school, she had given me an opportunity to pick up some part-time work with her to just do AE ConMed cross-checks, help put together study binders to ship out, all kinds of things. At one point they were moving locations when everything was still paper, ages ago. We're moving offices from a place in Arizona to San Francisco. And in the interim, she had to relocate certain documents to our house and was like, if there's a fire, this is the important stuff. So, but yeah, with those opportunities, it really sparked my interest in medicine. Got into emergency medicine myself, was a paramedic for several years and an instructor, all while continuing to, on the side, pick up stuff if my mom needed help with anything or any extra work I could do. Still involved, and then ended up having an opportunity to work with a former colleague of hers. And that's how I got in as a junior CRA. It's grown since then.
So you were You were groomed from a young age to be take over,
It
stay
helps.
inside the family business, if you will.
Yep. Yeah. My kids have zero interest, so we'll see.
Well, yeah. So give them some time. You never know; they might come around. So interesting. I mean, one thing I want to pick up on is that you went from an EMT, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting and I mean maybe intuitive transition, right? I mean, you've got some clinical knowledge and skills. Do you think like for a normal, let's say I say normal, but an EMT who maybe didn't have clinical research background, do you think that would be an easy move, or do you think that would be more challenging?
Yeah. So, I mean, it obviously depends on the level that you want to get into, but there's certain aspects to, some individuals that go straight through getting bachelor's of science degree, want to get into research versus, maybe a 2-year degree nurse that has that clinical knowledge. There's benefits to both, obviously. So, coming from, if you're an EMT, paramedic, what have you, or it's kind of almost parallel to nursing in a way, that you have that terminology background. There's all that stuff that you really don't learn about medications, drug interactions, how to look at patient charts. You don't really get that in university education if you have a degree. So there's really a leg up in that sense.
That's a good point. And again, you're maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems a little unique to sort of go straight to CRA or, into that side. A lot of people go from site level to CRO side or whatever the case may be. So they've got some, level set for what's going on. I mean, clearly you had experience in a different aspect, but if I were hiring a research coordinator, like an EMT sounds like potentially ideal. I mean, I know for worse, they don't tend to necessarily make the best money in the world.
Right.
You can potentially provide them, some better future opportunity at the site level.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other benefit there for if anyone's interested in coordinator roles from EMS, you have experience with drawing labs and things like that as well. I mean, not everybody gets that involved depending on where you work, what your protocols may be, but it's definitely a skill that you're trained to do. So.
Sure. Well, and again, that can be tough to find at a site level outside of people who may be, in a nursing type role. And, nurses, this was the debate, in a previous place I worked, but like they thought all CRCs should be nurses, which is fine, but I don't think that's necessarily accurate. And,
Right.
If you're a site, nurses can be expensive. I mean, that can make it difficult to staff well if you're paying for nursing versus someone who's got, phlebotomy skills and some more basic clinical.
Absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I want to pay everybody really well, definitely never want to be near the bottom of the barrel with what we're paying CRCs. But so it's interesting point of conversation because you don't want to address it that way necessarily. It's like, oh, well, they cost more. Well, it's not. They might have some different value in that for sure. But yeah, I mean, some of those more simplified studies that aren't too complex, maybe you just need some simple lab draws here and there. Absolutely. There's not an extreme requirement of medical knowledge and background.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's not saying anything derogatory about nurses. They're obviously,
Right.
They have a role. And, again, depending on what types of trials you run, sometimes it's absolutely necessary. But I think, again, it's an interesting conversation for the industry where it's tough because I think I'm hearing about sites having issues with staffing. And frankly, if I'm a young site coordinator, I'm looking to get into the CRO space pretty quick. I want to make some money, maybe I want to travel and, get some more experience. So it can make it tough for sites to find and retain good talent. But I think that's where you have to get a little bit creative sometimes, where again, you don't have to go with more obvious choices, but there's a lot of people out there with great soft skills. I think that's really undervalued at the site level.
Oh, extremely so. I mean, as a business owner, I mean, it's hard to evaluate. It's not easy to interview soft skills unless you want to do the most frustrating process and have, 4, 5, 6 interviews, which no one wants to do that.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a fair point. And sometimes you don't know until it's too late, right? Now, You know, I when I interview people, I like to not talk uncomfortably, not talk at some point, because I think you'll get to know, they'll start filling in the space, they'll start talking. I want to hear about them, and because a lot of people can prepare for interview questions, but I want to hear like what kind of person you are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I had friends and family that were in dentistry, and they actually did frequently working interviews. And that's the only space that I've really ever seen that happen myself. It's not something you can really do in clinical trials, get someone in for a working interview, get them on your delegation log and all that, just see how they interact with your trial patients. And it's not really going to happen. But
yeah, well, to that point, I feel like that's why the stakes are like really high at the site level, because you can't just drag somebody in and give them a week of training and be like, cool, you're good, get on the assembly line. It's much more nuanced, and I think it takes a great deal of investment. So when you lose a coordinator, that's hard on a site, right? Because
absolutely.
Again, you can't just drag someone else in. I mean, I know when I started, it was probably 2 years before I feel like I had any idea what the hell I was doing, really, in the bigger picture of things. And that had something to do with the fact that the site I worked at wasn't all that great at training. But nonetheless, I think it takes an inordinately long time for a coordinator to really get their arms around things unless they have some background.
Yeah, absolutely right. And then that really even extends beyond the site. That's something I've become more and more aware of personally with where I'm at now, having started up my own site management company. But, as a CRA, it's also a pain point that we deal with. If you have a lot of site turnover, you can clearly see how that affects your metrics in the end. Every visit, you're there, and I've got to spend half a day going through retraining, all those kinds of things. So that high turnover impacts a study significantly as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's bad for everybody involved. So let's go back to your CRA. How long have you been a CRA? Sort of, I guess, take us a little bit through 8 years. Okay.
8 years.
So you've been at it for a minute.
Yep.
And then at some point you were like, or I guess what led you to look into getting involved at the site level? Was there something that, specifically that spurred that, or maybe something you always had an interest in?
Yeah, I think there's a good number of us, once you're in the industry, things start to get a little complacent in a way. They're always changing with studies that you're working on and what have you. But I think we just get curious as to what else, what more can we do? There's definitely a lot of avenues that, I've explored and continue to evaluate as a CRA. There's management opportunities with CROs, lead CRA positions, and everything that you can elevate your career that way, project management, whatever you want to do. Sky's the limit. Then there's also the few of us maybe that, want to get into, maybe I should open my own site, see how that goes. There's many that get into tech, if they're like, hey, this really has been bothering me in the industry. How could I make, recruitment better? Could I make a platform or work with people to make a platform and help guide that to improve that as a whole? And that's certainly stuff that you'll see out there. So that's where I fell. It got to the point where it's been something I've been talking about for a while, end up discussing it with colleagues. And then I had a former colleague that has been a good friend for many years. He and I kept discussing it, and, it was really kind of how do we have time? How do we make that? How do we actually just close the loop? When do we actually just say, you know what, let's go ahead and do it? And then, as and many others know, through LinkedIn, because I'm pretty straightforward with talking about the benefits that I had from Veeva. So Veeva SiteVault ultimately made that possible. After connecting with Bree Burks from Veeva, long conversations about, what SiteVault was able to provide and all the resources, the fact that it didn't cost me anything. It was the most magnificent tool I could have stumbled across. And that's what ultimately made it possible to pull the trigger and say, yeah, this is going to make it work. We can do it now.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I didn't really even consider how it opens up in completely new opportunities for people. I mean, CRAs are presumably really well suited, I think, to get into the site game. I mean, you guys are exposed to different sites, different site structures, different tools, different tech, different everything,
right.
Which, I run sites and that's great, but I talk to other sites, but I don't have that boots on the ground, like seeing how things work. So again, presumably you're able to take those best practices with you and say, okay, I've seen what works, what I like, what doesn't work, what I hate. I can incorporate that, but you couldn't incorporate any of it if you didn't have some tech solutions to help you not have to be on site every day, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Obviously Veeva, not just the e-reg, but they have e-consent. I know they're building out some other tools as well. So
you do electronic delegation logs now, and everything's all connected with training. So, even doing individual site audits of our system is remarkably easy at this point.
Well, I think people, it's easy to underestimate because I still do a fair amount of regulatory for my sites, not all of it, but if I'm not at that particular site right then when somebody needs something, what am I supposed to do? I either have to track somebody else down, but it's way easier to just click in Veeva and be like, oh, provide access. Here it is. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. There's definitely that quality, like you essentially growing up through your career and, working at sites to owning your own, and you're battle hardened, you've gone through what you experienced at the sites that you worked with to the point where you started your own. But as a CRA, well, there's a lot that I've picked up on and learned. And, a lot of that's just having those deeper conversations with people, like yourself. I'll talk with site owners. I'll talk with coordinators. I've wanted to know their pain points all the time. So if I know their pain points as a CRA, then I can probably help them as a CRA as well. So, or at least try, Sometimes
Sure.
my hands are tied.
Well, and to your point, there's certainly a big swath of things that you guys wouldn't know about, like the more back office, the sorts of administrative things that go on, and budgets and contracts aren't quite as transparent on the CRA side. Is that fair?
That's 100% fair, and that's why I have a co-founder. That's what he's done his entire career in clinical research. He's been, somewhat of a middleman with site and sponsor contract negotiations. So without him, it wouldn't be possible. And then I think we kind of looked at each other that way. So technically, we don't have a CEO with our company. We felt that it wasn't right for either of us to just take this title of CEO or change it every couple of years. So we have a COO as myself, and he is our CFO, because that's essentially the roles that we have. He's the finance guy, and I'm the operations guy.
Yeah, I like that. And, I think it's important to have that at the site level if you're starting out, regardless of your background. I think people have different skills. I know, I've definitely had a lot of help in putting it together myself. So it can be nearly impossible to try to wear every hat, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Delegate as much as I can.
So, okay, when did you make that decision? So how long have you guys been active with Kenzona?
So we started our filing, got everything official back to be registered. The website launched, things like that. That all happened in March of this year. So March 2022.
So you guys are babies. You guys are still babies right now. It's good.
Still babies. Yeah, it's been good recently. The end of the year has post Thanksgiving, really. We've had some amazing conversations with some larger groups. I think we're going to have some phenomenal partnerships starting up in 2023 as well. So
Nice. So, are you willing to share, like, what's your model in terms of you guys embedding within other practices that are existing? Are you opening standalone site? Are you just offering more administrative help on the back end, or sort of what's your trajectory there?
The nice thing about how we wanted to approach it as an SMO is I didn't want to say, well, this is what we do as an SMO, and here's everything that we are going to do for you. I more so wanted to almost open that door, leave some discussion there. It's more of an approach of here's what we can do for you. What do you need? There's been a lot of physicians that we've talked to recently or even networks where maybe they've been involved in research in the past and are wanting to get back into it, but they don't have the staffing, they don't have the resources, they don't have people to handle regulatory. So, it really comes down to that, what do you need? If you need coordinators at your site, if you need regulatory management, we can help with all that. If you just want someone in your corner to help negotiate contracts, we can simply do that. So we're trying to be as diverse as possible because we want to not put too much pressure on saying this is what you have to do. We want to be able to just essentially provide support. Technically we're an SMO, but I know like yourself, I don't prefer the term because
Sure.
I feel like we're different. Everybody probably says that.
Well, I think it's interesting. And I think, we've been mostly the same philosophically, right? Like it's sort of like, what do you need? How much support do you need? And I think it's a tricky line to walk at times when you're trying to sort of be so tailored, because it can be challenging to sort of scale that out in any meaningful way. But although, I feel like I'm learning, it's sort of inherent, I don't think things don't work without buy-in from the physician and the clinic. And as a result, you really have to make yourself flexible to each, client you're working with. There's not like, this is the way and this will always be the way. Right. And again, that takes, for better or worse, that takes time to suss out. You can't just walk in and get a read on office politics and how involved the physician's going to be and support that maybe they don't even realize they need or are going to need. And so, that becomes challenging because it requires a certain level of just buy-in, and it doesn't always work,
Now there's some degree of this is the way, in a sense, if you need regulatory management, this is the way, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we have to do it in order to be involved. So there definitely is some points where there's that concept. There's been a lot of discussion recently with getting new tech and getting physicians involved in new tech that you're working with. And sometimes that can be a struggle. Well, that's again, one of those things. It's just something you have to do. You can complain all you want, but this is what you're going to do. So at times there are those, this is the way.
Yeah. Like it or leave it,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't want to, then you're done. Yeah.
Sure. No, and to your point, yes, there's always going to be some level of like, look, this is what you have to do. And whether, if you don't want to do it, then you're not being involved. I think that's important too, to recognize as a site or SMO, or, not every physician is a good PI. Not every physician is necessarily a good candidate to be a PI. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Right. But I think it's important to recognize that sometimes that's the case. And it kind of fits into what we were talking about off air before we started. Where does the line between being sort of white glove and some standardization? All right. We know sites operate differently, and that's fine, sometimes wildly differently. But would we benefit as an industry from some sort of standardization from the site side?
Yeah. I definitely think we would. The tricky point would be, how do you actually get it integrated? It would be phenomenal. And I think a lot more research would be possible if essentially we had a pre-built starter kit of this is what you need to do and this is how it's all done. Here's your Pyxis machine to dispense IP, everything's handled for you. There's trying to eliminate as much error as possible, but it's just not practical in all locations. It's not practical for all studies. It's back to almost some of the issues that we talk about with how DCTs are really impacting the industry as well, definitely in positive ways, but there's never going to be, in my opinion, a one size fits all answer. We talk about research, right? As a site owner, if you focus on phase 2, 3 trials, well, there's a bunch of people who have institutions that run phase 1s and that's it. And they do not align in design whatsoever. So,
sure. Yeah, no, that's perfectly fair. And, that's why I also think to some degree, it's like, well, do we just accept, look, this is how it is. Every study is different. They're all going to have their unique challenges. They're all going to be run a little bit differently, with as much consistency as possible. Yeah. But as a result, it's never going to be fast and clean and cheap, probably. It's always going to be, we can certainly probably get closer to, less expensive and faster, but just due to the inherent nature of the inability to be consistent, it's always going to be a little slow and expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. It may sound weird, but I don't know that I'd want it any other way. Maybe because I'm just getting old enough to or I'm becoming a curmudgeon, but I like the challenge. That's why I like our industry so much, is everything is diverse. Everything is unique. Every trial has its own challenges. No two are the same. That makes it fun. If everything ran exactly the same all the time, it was very routine, I'd get bored.
Sure. No, I mean, that's fair. And I think like you, it's part of why, even though I will curse it, I still enjoy very much what I do, because it is always something different and always something new. But I mean, in
Right.
terms of just ease, and I mean, look, ultimately what we're doing is pretty important, right? I mean, we're potentially testing the new drugs that could be extending people's lives and increasing their quality of life. And I mean, hell, saving lives of a lot of people. So again, like, to what degree do we say, look, let's just cut the crap and try to get on the same page here? And to your point, how practical is it really? Probably not, but I still think it's an interesting to consider to what degree we could.
Sure. It's funny, when we talk about more that sense of universalization, it's definitely something that's frowned upon when in the industry you're putting together your writing protocols, or you even go from version 1 to version 2 with an amendment, and that copy paste concept. Copy paste gets people in trouble quite a bit.
And I've heard conversations about like why trial design isn't, I mean, look, I don't know. I've done protocols or worked on protocols where I'm stuff. I'm like, that just doesn't make sense. And, I've been told that a lot of it is that if a company has gotten a drug approved using a protocol, well, they know what they're dealing with if they keep it relatively similar or as much as they can.
Right.
So
Right.
I have to wonder sometimes if stuff sort of grandfathers in because they're like, oh, well, we did this last time and it got approved without, a hassle. So it's safe to
Right.
just put it back
Right.
in, even if it doesn't make sense or maybe even hinders other parts of executing that protocol.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuance that goes into some of those. Sometimes FDA has input on protocols as well, so there's a lot of times where there's things that might be frustrating to the CRO or the sponsors as well, but their hands are tied. It's like, well, we have to do it. FDA says we need to do it. So sometimes I think it's just easier in a sense that these things are just built in ahead of time because we know the FDA has already had these responses in the past, so we're going to do that to begin with. I mean, why wouldn't you? I wouldn't expect a different response.
Right. Yeah. I would, to some degree. I mean, I can't blame them. And, I'll admit from the site side, like a lot of stuff's not clear to us. Like, why is that in there? Or why is this the case? And so it's easy to complain, but I completely understand that there's a ton of stuff going on in the background that we'll never have any idea about, whether it be scientific, regulatory, or otherwise. It's
Sure.
not always clear and easy to judge, but still frustrating nonetheless.
Yeah, completely agree. I've been there, as a CRA, even that there's pushback from the monitoring team a lot of the time. So it's like, well, I need to be able to explain this. Like, what's going on here? Or new changes are discussed or presented. Previously, I've been part of those teams where, you're reviewing changes and you're going through track changes and checking to make sure stuff makes sense. And sometimes the language that comes through, I can already tell. If I'm wondering exactly how this is going to work, guarantee other people are going to have questions. So,
right. Yeah. I can't anticipate that.
Yeah.
This is again, just sort of a random detour, but as a CRA and someone who's been a CRA for a while, what are your biggest like site pet peeves, like from sites, right? Like, what do you hate walking into or what sort of like, if you want to trigger a CRA, like what would that look like from the site side?
That might be a big list. No. That's a tough question because every CRA is different. So I don't think there's too much universally. It really depends on how CRAs work with their sites. A lot of sites, if you say you're adding to a reg binder, sometimes I've had sites that are phenomenally diligent with doing that, and they'll make copies of documents that they know I'll need. So they'll just, print out 2 copies or make a copy of it, and they'll file it in the binder, leave a copy with a sticky note that says, this is for Mitch, copy for Mitch, so I can just grab that. Oh, great. So there's a lot of positives that I've had. As far as negatives, though, I mean, you end up coming across them. I don't know if there's anything specific that I would see that would immediately trigger me outside of the obvious, right?
Sure. I mean, you ever get stuck in the closet doing your monitoring, or like, again, just
working on exam tables, push
right.
back in like some broom closet, kind of cramped space for. I've written off like a bookshelf before while co-monitoring. So, I mean, we occupied a break room, and then every lunchtime, essentially we just kind of like pack up our stuff, and then you just have to learn to adapt in a way. Like, yeah, it might be frustrating for me, but okay, well, we'll close up what we're doing, move our stuff out of the way, and then just invite the rest of the office in to lunch for break time, and then we'll get back to it. But it's not necessarily, doesn't have to be an issue. I like to think that I've built a good rapport with all the sites I've been to in the past. I know that's not true 100% of the sites, but sometimes, I think people just take it rough when they get called out, if they've done something wrong, and you address it. But,
Well, I think too, look, I mean, I've talked about this with my coordinators recently, about like to your point earlier, every CRA is very different. And
extremely.
We want to have a good rapport, but it's not always clear how to do that even. I mean, some CRAs are very just focused on the work. Yeah, they don't care, and that's fine. We can just blast through the things. And again, there's different levels of nitpick. That's not the greatest word, but you get what I'm saying. Some tend to be really over the top and then expect you to push back. And then some are understanding and you can sort of talk through those things. It can be tough for a site to figure out, like, what am I dealing with here? And I've seen things sort of get off on the wrong foot when challenging to figure that out. I mean, to your point, look, sites are used to getting beat up, I think, by CRAs. I don't mean that, again, in a bad way, but the stuff we do is so scrutinized, every little stray mark. So sites are used to that, but I think it's more about like the tone and relationship or lack thereof that sort of happens between the CRA and coordinator.
Oh, you're 100% correct. I mean, I like to approach it like, okay, here's the things I found. Let's fix them. We can work on this together. We can get it fixed. Other than, here's all the stuff you screwed up.
Yeah, right. Well, and again, I think it's just different because some will come in and be like, look, we're partners here. We're going to work through this together. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, we'll fix it. Again, obviously we're not doing anything insanely wrong. Mistakes happen.
Oh, right.
But then some do come in with more, like, you feel like they're like tattling on you, or they'll talk to your PI and mention things they didn't mention to you during the visit. So again, just getting off on the right foot, I think, can be like really undervalued.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that communication. I mean, there's sites where I think if we go back to the pet peeve, I think that might be more of a pet peeve that I have, is where if I just don't see my staff, it's impossible to get a meeting with my PI. Nobody has the time. Essentially they just drop off a bunch of binders and stuff in the morning, and then I don't see them till 4 p.m. That's going to be a pet peeve. But as a CRA, I like to have always had everything that I can find. I want to get that all addressed as soon as possible. So I'm going to start the visit essentially with like, hey, this is stuff I looked at beforehand. Let's get this knocked out. And then any queries even that I'm putting into EDC, see if we can get them addressed real quick before the end of the visit, because I want 0 follow-up items. I don't want to have a bunch of stuff lingering. I don't want to send off a letter with 18 things on it just so I feel like I have stuff boxes to tick.
Right.
I want to resolve all the issues and not just list them. Yeah,
that's fair. And I mean, look, even for us as coordinators, it can be frustrating to not get like a PI nailed down, for the visits. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much, like, I've spent plenty of time standing outside a cath lab, like waiting for a doctor to come out, because they said they were available at this time, and now it's 45 minutes later and we're standing there. So yeah, that's challenge. That can be frustrating for, site and CRA. Yeah. I just can't imagine being a CRA. It sounds like a lot to deal with.
It can be a lot sometimes, but it's great a lot of times too. It's that same sense of, as a site, if you work on a study that ends up having a significant impact, it makes you feel good about yourself, right? Like you're making a positive impact on the world, essentially. So there's definitely that.
Absolutely true.
If you have good relationships with your sites, I think it's phenomenal. I mean, if I had poor relationships with all my sites and it was just frustration and everybody was upset all the time, it would be wildly too stressful.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I guess it's all in the relationships, right? I mean, I think
it really is
crazy how sort of
crazy concept.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess it's not, but again, we're in a very clinical space, right? So it's sometimes I feel like it's overlooked how if you come in and we're cool, it's going to make both of our lives easier. We're going to get things accomplished.
I've been at monitoring visits, where I've had coordinators that ended up being in tears. They were so stressed out with other CRAs that were there for different trials. And in a way, it's like, it's nice that they can even come to me to like vent. I'm like, yeah, get it out. Tell me what's going on. Why are you frustrated? I'm sorry that's happening. I can't tell them what to do though, but.
Well, I'm going to take another topic detour here, but I hear you're Batman.
I am, apparently. That actually started with the Veeva thing. So the way this whole Batman concept, clinical research Batman, came to be, I had made some comment while doing training about Veeva systems not having audio for some of their training. It's like, what are my qualifications? I don't really have any. I was like, but I read to my daughter all the time, and she likes it when I do a Batman voice. And that just blew up. I mean, there was people making like little memes of it, putting a Batman mask over my LinkedIn profile photo. And I ended up joining my first meeting with Bree Burks from Veeva. I got in there wearing a Batman mask actually for a meeting. So it's been fun. And since then, as I've been busy and trying to find more time, I took that almost in a way of like, now I feel like I have this responsibility. So I recently started the Clinical Research Justice League group on LinkedIn. We're still growing. We had issues when it started. I know LinkedIn was like having problems that day. I got locked out of my account for a little while. So there's like 200 pending invites, but they're not actionable. It's kind of odd.
It's the clinical research villains working against you.
I like to say that our group hit LinkedIn like Taylor Swift tickets did. We just crashed LinkedIn that day. But essentially, the Clinical Research Justice League, though, I was trying to pull people from the community to try to have, more of a core spot where we can have high-level conversations, really focus on ethic issues that we see in our industry, equality, and any hot topics that are of high level significance, not just the minor gripes here and there, but I really wanted to have a platform where we can say, hey, what do you think we can do about this? How do you think we can address this issue, and not just a massive forum for all people to complain, and wanted to keep it somewhat tight knit, but really just try to get some voices involved so we can make some positive change in the industry if possible. You need to be able to identify the issues and have those discussions to make it happen. So in that concept as well, the way almost poetically I see myself as like the clinical research Batman as part of the Justice League is that he's really the only member of the Justice League that doesn't actually have superpowers. He just essentially had the ability to put together the Justice League. Right. Sure, he has a lot of, tech and money, but that's really what he did, though. He was the founder of the Justice League. So it kind of worked pretty well because, everybody that I've been inviting to join the Justice League, Clinical Research Justice League, they're all people that I have so much respect for, that I feel like are far better suited to be there than I am. And those are the voices that I want to hear. I want to have those conversations with. So that's why I want them to be a part of the group.
Yeah, no, I mean, hey, putting it together is a superpower. I tell you. I mean, it's a really exciting time, though. I mean, we are hearing more active voices, I think, across the industry. So I think it's important to have somebody who keeps those conversations going and organizes. I mean, I'm guilty of blasting out things, complaints, certainly, in my small way of trying to create conversations, but I still think we need way more, right? I mean, there really can't be enough.
You get views, though. Controversy is definitely a view getter.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it, I'd rather it pay my bills than give me views, but it doesn't do me that much good.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fun adventure so far. So we'll see how the Justice League ends up growing and playing out. It's quite unique. If I make it to a conference sometime soon, I've already been told I need to bring my Batman mask. So
there you go.
I don't know about that for a conference because, if you pull the Batman mask off, well, you got to put all the eyeshadow on. It might be too much. I'll just wear a Batman shirt.
You just need to come in for lunch. Just the lunch period. You can wander around as Batman and then disappear into the night.
I'll get a booth.
There you go.
Just stand there, signing autographs.
I love it. Well, where can people find you online?
So you can find Kenzona Clinical Research, which is our company, at KenzonaClinicalResearch.com. Complex. We also have a LinkedIn page. You can reach out to me personally on LinkedIn, Mitchell Hilbe, and you can find me through Clinical Research Justice League as well. I'm all over the place. So reach out, happy to connect. Essentially, what we're looking for Kenzona Clinical Research, our main goal, we kind of talked earlier about what it is we do and how we're able to help, investigators and sites. But it's really our goal to be able to bring research to those individuals that want to work in it. I mean, we'll work in larger metropolitans, but even more rural or suburban physician groups or networks or individual one-offs, if they want to be involved in research but can't manage all that on their own. Those are the people we really want to connect with, because we want to, like DCTs in that sense, we want to be able to provide research opportunities to whoever wants to be involved. There's a lot of people out there that have an interest, and we've been finding them. So if you're listening, connect. We're happy to have those conversations, see what we can do for you.
Very good. I'll make sure we get all your info on our show notes page. And man, I just want to thank you for coming on. Anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
Like and subscribe. Follow the podcast. That's about it.
Appreciate that.
We appreciate your time.
Very good. And if you haven't, go check out the live stream I did with Mitch a couple of weeks back. It's also on the website. Otherwise, Mitch, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thanks, Brad.
As always, thank you so much for listening to Note to File Podcast. Make sure to check us out at notetofilepodcast.com. Check out our live stream. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, a rating, whatever you feel like. We appreciate all feedback. Thanks, guys.